Hello, this is Someone Gone Hawaii, and today we are looking at the Torrent and Sleeping Giant SMGs, sort of. I'll explain in a minute. For those who follow the channel, I've done a number of build videos featuring the Sleeping Giant, which has a chance to buff one or more of its stats on reload, and a 1/3 chance to buff all of them to maximum. Sleeping Giant rate of fire when buffed can be 2.5 times listed. Damage can max out at 5.2 times listed. There's a separate video on the weird damage buffs linked below. All builds involve getting those maxed out buffs, usually against the jack dummy, then using ammo regen mechanics and mag size increases to produce huge DPS while avoiding reloading. Reloading, swapping weapons, or save quitting resets all of those buffs. Those are limitations of those builds. Most of the time we use ASC generate Terra on a grenade mod and Terra ammo regen on a shield. Okay. Enter DLC 6 and the Torrent, another dull SMG with much higher listed base damage than the Sleeping Giant and extremely high rates of fire. And the question that pops into my head is, can the Torrent replace the Sleeping Giant? The answer is it depends on what's important to us. Okay, let me lay out some things before we get to the comparison. The Sleeping Giant is a main game world drop with increased drop chance from one punch in electricity. Non-elemental, fire, shock, and corrosion. Also comes in ×2 variants that consume 2 ammo per shot. Told you about the reload buffs. There are 180 variants. Torrent is a DLC 6 arms race exclusive with an increased chance to show up in these chests. Comes in fire, corrosion, and radiation only. Also comes in ×2 variants that consume 2 ammo per shot. The projectiles travel in a corkscrew pattern that can make critting a bit harder than the Sleeping Giant, and that pattern also results in a slower moving projectile. Torrent, as mentioned earlier, has much higher base damage and rates of fire than the unboosted Sleeping Giant, even when looking at lower performance variants. Reload speeds range from 1.8 to 2.5 seconds, which is not too bad, and mag sizes are much larger, 45 to 88. There are 810 variants. Now, this is not a normal nor simple comparison. We are not comparing two guns. We are comparing the Sleeping Giant build to the standalone Torrent and to the Torrent using the same build, same gear and skills. So we're doing a number of things to keep things as simple as possible. Okay, number one, we're only looking at Amara. This stuff probably applies to the other 3 Vault Hunters, but there are additional or different factors that come into play with each of them. I've barely looked at them. We'll save that for another time. 2, we are only comparing Fire, Shock, Corrosion Sleeping Giants to Fire, Corrosion Torrents. These all get the same elemental damage scaling. They are directly comparable. Non-elemental Sleeping Giants have higher relative damage and don't get the deep well mag boost. Radiation Torrents have lower relative damage. Okay, so we're not going to compare those. For the on-paper comparisons, we're not going into too much detail on the underlying math. Just understand that there are 3 DPS calculations. 2 of those factor in Terra ammo regen, and one of those gets really complicated. Well, gets kind of complicated. If enough people comment in chat, I will explain the complex stuff in another video. If you're interested though, it looks like this. So here's the baseline comparison of the 2. These Sleeping Giant damage numbers are not the ones listed on the card. These are 5.2 times listed. This is the max boosted damage we can get upon reloading. Okay. These rates of fire are also not as listed. They are also not 2 times listed, which is the max rate of fire we can achieve from a reload buff. Okay. This is the maximum rate of fire that Terra ammo regen can support depending upon mag size. Okay, the max numbers we can maintain without reloading. The max Terra ammo regen rate, which is 16% of the effective mag size, puts a cap on Sleeping Giant average rate of fire. The maximum effective mag size I've achieved so far using mag boost from the skill Deep Well, 20%, com passives, 29%, and artifact passives, 62%, is 111% of the listed mag size. Okay, 60% of that is our maximum rate of fire. Half of that for ×2 variants. Okay. If we exceed that amount on average, we will reload. Okay, this does not mean we do not fire at the max boosted rate in combat. It just means we can't hold down the trigger indefinitely. I emphasize this in the Sleeping Giant videos, the need to fire in bursts and monitor ammo use. Okay, so for Sleeping Giant calculated true DPS, we use these Terra ammo regen capped rates of fire. And this is how that compares to just the Torrent with normal DPS figures. Notice that single shot Sleeping Giants run away with it. And even ×2 Torrent variants don't measure up. Okay, even with rate of fire capped by ammo regen, Sleeping Giant turns out more DPS. Okay, at least when looking at the top performers. This is also true in testing. The Torrent actually does really well. Okay, I want to state that. I want to emphasize that. Very effective, and it's very enjoyable to use. But the Sleeping Giant, all other things being equal, does better. Okay, Torrent also has one other problem. By virtue of ammo regen, Sleeping Giant builds do not have an ammo supply problem. Torrent does. A high performance Torrent, especially a ×2 variant, will run us out of ammo very fast. I got through barely a third of the Athena's map, grabbing ammo here and there before I just about ran dry. Okay, there's two ways to deal with this. One, cut per launch pad. As long as we don't mind slamming every once in a while and don't miss the flexibility of using other artifacts, that works. Okay, you can also switch artifacts in and out, although we'll be doing that a lot with a ×2 variant. Okay, the second way I already alluded to is Terra ammo regen. This is what happens if we basically substitute the Torrent for the Sleeping Giant. Okay, Terra ammo regen actually ups the DPS of the Torrent by virtue of the fact that we can fire a whole lot longer before needing to reload, and we don't actually have to worry about reloading. Okay, now these higher numbers approach the Sleeping Giant, especially on the low end, but the Sleeping Giant still wins out. So what's the point? Why did I say in the title it's a draw? Why use the Torrent? Well, flexibility. Even if we do everything right and don't accidentally reload, we can't swap Sleeping Giants in combat, which means we're stuck with one setup for duration. One gun with one particular element and one particular anointment. That's fine for engagements with consistent enemy types and maps, but the moment those things change, our selected Sleeping Giant can become less effective, less than ideal. We can change other gear if we want, but that sometimes means a less effective Sleeping Giant if we can't change it to compensate. Okay, and the raw numbers don't show us that. A really good example is with the takedowns. I utilize a URAD corrosive Sleeping Giant with a front loader shield for takedowns. Okay, this is ideal for use with ties that bind in the initial map section and the bridge of the Model 1 takedown. The Valkyrie fight, however, is better suited to a transformer shield and to phase cast. Okay, the Wotan fight is the same except that I use a stopgap shield instead. Okay, and we can still use the same Sleeping Giant in both fights, and I have done that. But unless we switch to a deathless artifact with a magazine buff, we lose the URAD anointment much of the time. So those fights, as a result, become longer and harder. They're still doable, but they take longer. Okay, with a Torrent, however, we can switch to a phase cast 250 anointment to better complement the rest of the build, or anything else we want. In situations where we prefer to swap weapons, the Torrent outshines the Sleeping Giant. Okay, still need to get used to the projectile pattern, okay, that corkscrew and its slower speed. But beyond that, the Torrent is just much easier to use in a lot of situations. It may not be as good as the Sleeping Giant at dishing out raw DPS in ideal situations, but it's more than enough to do the job. Okay, a couple other issues of note. Similar to the Sleeping Giant, we should probably avoid ×2 variants, especially ones with small magazines. ×2 variants have higher DPS values, but they also run through ammo twice as fast. Okay, this reduces the effectiveness of ammo regen, sometimes so much that we still end up with ammo shortage issues. Basically, avoid 45 and 40 round variants, period, even single shot ones. 62 and 68 round variants appear to best balance between damage and rate of fire. Okay, some single shot 80 and 88 round variants with boosted mag sizes can actually be fired indefinitely without let up. Ammo regen exceeds rate of fire in those cases. Okay, we can actually hold down the trigger indefinitely. 62 and 68, however, put out more raw DPS because smaller magazines have higher damage, and the need to reload occasionally is a non-issue pretty much. So when I say it's a draw, it's personal preference. I suspect most people will go with the Torrent as it's just easier to use. There are a couple of other things, however, to keep in mind. First, with 810 variants, a third being ×2, and a third with 45 or 49 round magazines, it's a lot harder to get just the right Torrent. Okay, these numbers are for the best and worst performing of each. There's a lot of overlap, a lot of blood play in between those two sets of numbers. Okay, additionally, as an arms race exclusives, Torrents are a pain in the ass to farm. One Punch, the Sleeping Giant designated source, is a quick farm with the right build. We have no build going into arms race. Okay, we will have to survive till we get a Torrent if we get a torrent, then survive to extract it. So this too may influence our choices. Okay, I have posted a build with some good torrents and sleeping giants linked in the description below. They are not the top performing torrents. I've yet to get to those. That's how hard they are to farm. But they're up there and they're fun to use and they get the job done. What I've done, the testing, whatever. I've run Molly 1 true takedowns at least half a dozen times with them. Okay. The build also has 5 points in heavy rain, not for the splash, but to compensate for the slower torrent projectile speed. You may want to move those points elsewhere. One other option, run them both. For shorter runs or ones where the target and terrain don't vary much, go with the Sleeping Giant. For more complex runs, start with the Sleeping Giant, then switch to the Torrent. It's up to you. You still gotta do the process of figuring out, getting the maximum buffs and then locking them in. We need at most, I don't know, half a dozen of each with different elements and armies to cover any given situation. I've also not tested this build with a Doll Company Man with both manufacture and passive boost to mag size because I've yet to find one. A good, actually, God Roll Company Man with max damage, crit damage, and both mag size boosts could really boost performance of both guns in the build. Okay. One final note, Terra Ammo Regen means Terra Anointed Grenades and Shields. This build does fine with what's available right now. Front loader, stopgap, transformer, whatever we wish to experiment with. Come October, September, October, and the return of Bloody Harvest, we'll be able to get Terra Anointed Beskars, Madcaps, Super Soldiers, Infernal Wish 2, they'll probably kill us, as well as DLC 5 and 6 grenades, including the Mesmer. Okay, so that's something to look forward to. So that's the draw. They both have their advantages. Sleeping Giant is easier to get and actually performs better ideally. Torrent is easy to play, especially with some content, if you can get some good one. There's plenty of both to play with in the save file. Please like, comment, subscribe. If you like this content, check me out on twitchtv.com/SomeOldGuyInHawaii. And as always, stay safe, and thanks for watching.